I want my niece back. My sister wants my niece back. My sister is my mother. Everyone wants my niece and my great niece back.
At 12:30 p.m. on a Wednesday in December 2018, 16-year-old Ayanna Sawyer walked out of her high school cafeteria in Jacksonville, Florida. Her backpack swung over one shoulder, her phone snug in her pocket. Just another school day. She said she was heading to see a friend. That was the story she told her teachers. But at 12:43 p.m., she walked toward a salvage yard on the city's east side, a place she didn't normally visit, a place where her uncle worked. His name was Jonathan Quiles, 38 years old. By marriage, the uncle she saw at family gatherings, the one who sometimes dropped off her favorite snacks, the one friends said talked to her like a big cousin. By 1:17 p.m., her phone pinged near that junkyard, then silence. No calls, no replies, no check-ins. Her mom assumed she was safe, assumed she was delaying her return because of homework or a short stop with a friend. But at 8:47 p.m., a text went out from Ayanna's phone. It read, "I'm okay. Short, nothing more, only." It didn't sound like her. No emojis, no voice, no personality in the words. By 11:03 p.m., her family reported her missing. A simple disappearance at first. A teenager out later than usual. But by sunrise, detectives weren't searching for a runaway anymore. They were building a murder case against the man who claimed he was family. A single question cut through the quiet morning. What did investigators see in those text messages that completely dismantled his story? Before we continue, if you appreciate careful, in-depth true crime coverage like this, consider subscribing. It helps this channel explore cases with the detail and respect they deserve and ensures you don't miss what's next. Now, back to the story. She was 16, old enough to want independence, young enough to still check in with her mom before making plans. Ayanna Sawyer. She loved taking pictures on her phone, selfies, snapshots with friends in the hallway. Filtered sunsets over Jacksonville. Her laugh came quick, sometimes loud, sometimes at the wrong time. Teachers described her as social, easily distracted, but kind. She cared about how she looked. Hair done, outfit matched, shoes clean. She wasn't withdrawn. She wasn't isolated. She had a circle. Friends who expected her back after lunch that day. Friends who started texting when she didn't return to class. At home, she had responsibilities, chores, a curfew, rules that sparked small arguments, normal arguments. Her mother, LaShonda Sawyer, would later tell reporters that Ayanna had dreams bigger than the neighborhood they lived in. College, a better future, something stable. She liked music playing softly while she did homework. She liked scrolling before bed, liked feeling connected. And she stayed connected to family. That's what makes the next detail harder to process. Because the person prosecutors would later accuse wasn't some stranger. It was someone who had been around, at holidays, at cookouts, inside the house. Jonathan Quiles had married into the family years earlier. He wasn't blood-related, but he was trusted, at least at first. There were messages between him and Ayanna. Friendly on the surface, conversations that stretched late. He was older, 38. She was 16. That difference alone raises questions. But inside families, lines blur quietly, and sometimes nobody steps in fast enough. On December 19th, 2018, Ayanna left school during lunch. Security footage showed her walking out calmly. No sign of distress, no visible fear. She told classmates she would be back. She never returned. Her mother didn't know she had left campus early. Didn't know she was headed toward the salvage yard where Quiles worked. That detail would surface later. Through phone records, through GPS mapping, through testimony in court. At home that evening, nothing looked wrong. Her bed untouched. Her charger missing because it was with her. Hours passed, calls went unanswered, and LaShonda began to feel it. That shift parents describe later. That instinct. She started calling friends, then family, then him. Quiles answered. Calm. Yeah, and he said he hadn't seen her. He said he had been working all day. He said maybe she was with friends. Normal tone, measured voice. But by the next morning, detectives were already examining something small. The timing. Because surveillance cameras near the junkyard captured Ayanna entering the property around 1:15 p.m. They also captured Quile's vehicle, leaving later that afternoon, alone. That's when the tone of the investigation changed. Chan and the soft picture of a teenage girl with friends and plans for the weekend was replaced by a timeline, a structured sequence, one that would lead investigators back to the uncle who said he knew nothing. Nothing about that morning suggested it would be the last time her mother saw her. But something shifted, quietly, and it shifted inside the family.
I'm not a monster. I had nothing to do with her disappearance.
December 19th, 2018. The day begins like any other. Morning light through the kitchen window, quick breakfast, a reminder about school. Iyanna leaves for class. Security cameras later confirm she arrived. Hours pass without incident. Then lunchtime, 12:30 p.m. She walks out of the cafeteria. 12:43 p.m. Exterior school footage shows her leaving campus. She isn't running. She isn't looking over her shoulder. She looks expected. Phone records later show she had been communicating with Jonathan Quills before she left. Short exchanges, arrangements. He was working at the salvage yard on North Main Street in Jacksonville that afternoon. 1:15 p.m. Surveillance cameras at that property capture Iyanna entering through the gate. She's alone. That is the last clear image of her alive. 1:17 p.m. Her phone connects to a nearby cell tower that services the junkyard area. After that, movement slows. No outgoing calls. And no social media activity, no snap streaks, no Instagram posts. Unusual for her. 2 p.m. School officials realize she never returned from lunch. Attendance flags it. Calls go home. By late afternoon, her mother understands she didn't come back to class at all. Concern rises quickly. By 6 p.m., friends are texting. No replies. By 8:47 p.m., a message is sent from her phone. I'm okay. That's it. No detail, no warmth. Family members say it didn't read like her usual writing style. No extra words, no slang, no reassurance. Just 3 letters and a period. Investigators later examined the timing carefully, because around that same evening, surveillance shows Quayle's vehicle leaving the junkyard property. Alone. Night settles in. 11:03 p.m. Iyanna is officially reported missing. The case begins as a missing teen investigation. But detectives move fast. They request phone records immediately. They secure the junkyard as a potential scene. And when they review footage from inside the property, something stands out. A truck belonging to Quiles moves positions several times that afternoon. Short trips, unusual stops. The next morning, law enforcement returns to the yard with cadaver dogs. They search vehicles, they search containers, they search the surrounding property. They also track phone location data. Her phone stops transmitting in the same general area where his vehicle remained for hours, then goes silent entirely. Now no battery drain pattern, no further pings. That abrupt end suggests manual shutdown. Meanwhile, detectives question Quiles. He says she never came to see him. He says he was busy with work. He says he barely used his phone. But digital records disagree. Cell tower logs place both devices within the same narrow zone at the same time. Not once, repeatedly. Investigators also recover security footage from nearby roads. It shows Quiles driving away later that evening without her. On the timeline tightens minute by minute, text by text, signal by signal. Then detectives notice something else. That 8:47 p.m. text message. Metadata indicates it was sent after several hours of silence, during a period when her phone should have been inactive. The keyboard pattern looks different. Prosecutors later argue it was staged, an attempt to delay alarm, an attempt to buy time. Search teams expand beyond the junkyard. Wooded areas, drainage canals, empty lots. For weeks, nothing is found. Then, nearly 2 months later, human remains are discovered in a wooded area off a rural road in Nassau County. Medical examiners later confirm the remains belong to Iyanna Sawyer. The cause of death, homicide. And the timeline, the one's just a sequence of pings and camera frames, becomes the backbone of a murder case. Investigators now know two things with certainty. She walked into that junkyard. She never walked out. And the last adult known to be with her was her uncle.
We knew where she was at. We would have been the first ones to grab her.
He wasn't an outsider. Jonathan Quayles had married into the family years earlier. He showed up to gatherings, stood near the grill at cookouts, helped carry folding chairs inside after birthdays. He worked at a salvage yard, steady job, blue-collar routine. To neighbors, he looked ordinary. To Iyanna, he was Uncle John. That title carries weight in a family. It lowers defenses. Detectives began with the basics: phone records, text logs, call frequency. What they found wasn't explosive at first glance, and it was steady, consistent, private. Messages between a 38-year-old man and a 16-year-old girl. Not always inappropriate on the surface, but persistent. Late-night exchanges, inside jokes that excluded others, plans made without telling her mother. That pattern matters, because grooming rarely begins with something obvious. It often starts with attention, special treatment, secret communication, gradual shifts in tone. Milk investigators later testified that Quayles and Iyanna communicated frequently in the weeks leading up to December 19th. He knew her school schedule. He knew when she had lunch. He knew when she was alone. That's not random. That's familiarity. When detectives interviewed him the first time, he appeared calm. Measured answers, direct eye contact. He denied seeing her that day, denied any unusual interaction. Said if she came by, it was brief. Then he adjusted that detail later. Small changes. First, she never showed up. Then, maybe she stopped by for a minute. Then, he couldn't remember clearly. Those shifts create friction in an investigation, because truth tends to stay consistent. Memory gaps often don't. Meanwhile, digital evidence continued to build. Phone tower data placed both devices inside the same narrow coverage zone during the same window. Surveillance cameras showed her entering the property. There was no footage of her leaving. When asked about the 8:47 p.m. text message, Quayles denied sending it, but prosecutors would later argue the language didn't match Iyanna's usual writing style. Short, flat, without her personality. Investigators also discovered that Quayles' phone activity dipped during critical hours. Limited outgoing communication. Minimal movement, almost as if attention was focused elsewhere. Then came the search of his vehicle. Inside, and detectives located fibers and other trace evidence that forensic analysts would later compare. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, but enough to raise questions. Community reaction divided quickly. Some relatives defended him. He's family. He wouldn't hurt her. Others looked back at past interactions and saw warning signs. Too much closeness, too much private time. In court, prosecutors suggested a motive rooted in control. An adult who blurred boundaries saw as an adult who believed he could manage the situation. When she left school that afternoon, she didn't sneak into unknown territory. She walked towards someone she knew, someone she trusted. That trust became central to the state's argument, because access changes everything. Access explains opportunity. Opportunity explains timing. And timing, paired with digital proof, tightens the circle. But at this stage of the investigation, there was still one major absence. No recovery site yet. No confirmed cause of death. Just circumstantial layers stacking quietly. And one man whose story kept adjusting under pressure. When someone inside the family becomes the focus, the case changes. Questions feel heavier. Conversations grow tense. And every memory gets re-examined through a new lens. Detectives weren't looking at a stranger in a parking lot. They were looking at an uncle, a man who had walked through that front door many times. Now, they were asking what happened after she walked through his gate.
You can't even talk to me, really. I never did anything to that girl, and now you put me through this, and you call me your brother. You're right. After this is over, I'm all the way done with you. You're a real piece of for what you've done.
Investigations don't collapse because of emotion. They turn on data. cold, precise, unimpressed by excuses. Phone records were pulled first, not just call logs, everything. Tower connections, signal strength, timestamps measured down to the second. Iana's device connected to a tower covering the salvage yard area at 1:17 p.m. After that, movement slowed. By late afternoon, activity dropped. Then it stopped completely. Her phone went silent. No gradual battery decline. No handoff between towers. Just an abrupt halt. That pattern suggests interruption. Now compare that with Jonathan Quiles' phone. Same coverage zone, same narrow sector. For hours, then into the night, and into the next morning. His phone and hers were in the same place for 30 hours. Let that sit. Cell tower triangulation doesn't give an exact GPS dot, but it narrows a device into sectors. Investigators mapped both phones within overlapping arcs that centered around the junkyard property. Repeated overlap, repeated confirmation. Then, vehicle data entered the picture. Modern vehicles store information, ignition cycles, door activity. Sometimes internal module logs. Records showed movement of Quills' truck during the same window her phone activity ceased. Short repositioning events. Stops. Idle time. Not typical for routine yard work, according to testimony from coworkers. Then came the message sent at 8:47 p.m. I'm okay. 3 words. Forensic analysts reviewed her prior texts. Sentence length. Use of punctuation. Frequency of emojis. Capitalization habits. She typically used the shorthand, often added emojis. Rarely ended short reassurances with a period. The 8:47 message was clean, minimal, uncharacteristic. Metadata also showed that the phone screen had been active just long enough to compose and send that message, then nothing. No scrolling, no follow-up communication. That matters because natural usage patterns create digital noise. App switches. Notifications opened. Background refresh. This device showed almost none of that. Prosecutors later argued the message was staged, sent to delay concern, to create the illusion of safety. Then investigators processed the truck. Inside the rear cargo area, forensic technicians collected trace fibers. Microscopic comparison matched fibers consistent with clothing Iana was known to be wearing that day. Not just similar in color, consistent in material and weave characteristics. Trace evidence doesn't scream. It whispers. But when combined with location data, surveillance footage, and message analysis, it strengthens the chain. There was no forced entry at the yard, no sign she ran, no sign she left voluntarily. Security footage captured her walking in. There was no footage of her walking out. When confronted again with the digital overlap, Quiles adjusted parts of his story. He said maybe she came by briefly. He said maybe she left on her own. But he couldn't explain why their phones stayed near each other long after she should have been gone. He couldn't explain the truck movements. He couldn't explain the altered text pattern. Each piece alone might raise a question. Together, they formed structure. Phone data doesn't lie easily. It records quietly. It timestamps without emotion. And in this case, it placed a teenage girl and her uncle in the same confined space during the exact window when she disappeared. At that point, detectives weren't guessing anymore. They were building a case. Once law enforcement confirmed Iana Sawyer was missing, the story moved beyond the family. It reached the city. Jacksonville news stations interrupted regular programming. Her school photo filled television screens. 16 years old. Bright smile. Braids pulled back neatly. The first press conference was brief. Sheriff's office officials stood behind a podium. Measured tone, few details. They confirmed she left school during lunch. They confirmed investigators were following leads. They asked the public for information. No speculation, no accusations. But the silence between sentences carried weight. Outside the Sawyer home, neighbors gathered, Candles lined the sidewalk, handwritten signs taped to utility poles. Bring Ayanna home. Community search teams formed within days. Volunteers combed through wooded areas, checked drainage ditches, walked vacant lots. Some brought dogs, some brought water bottles and flashlights. Hope surged when a wooded area near the salvage yard was searched heavily. Police tape stretched across brush. K-9 units moved methodically. News helicopters circled overhead. For a few hours, people believed something would be found. Then, the search ended without discovery. Hope dipped. Meanwhile, tip lines flooded. Some callers claimed sightings. Others offered theories. Most tips required follow-up and went nowhere. Investigators had to filter noise from substance. Behind the scenes, detectives continued focusing on the timeline. They re-interviewed Jonathan Quiles. They reviewed his statements again. Then something small shifted the case further. A nearby resident came forward with doorbell camera footage. The video was time-stamped. Clear view of the street. Late evening on December 19th. Quiles' vehicle drove past slowly, then returned in the opposite direction. Alone. No passenger visible. The footage placed him away from the junkyard during a window he had described differently. When investigators compared the timestamp to phone data, the overlap was precise. Movement recorded on video. Location data confirming the same route. It narrowed the margin for error in his account. Public attention intensified after that. Media outlets began identifying him as a person of interest. Reporters gathered outside court hearings. Microphones extended, questions shouted. Family members were divided publicly now. Some stood beside him during early proceedings. Others stepped back. Social media conversations escalated. Support posts, accusations, speculation. Law enforcement maintained discipline. No emotional statements, no premature declarations. Then, in February 2019, nearly 2 months after Ayanna vanished, search teams located human remains in a wooded area off a rural road in Nassau County. The area was remote, brush thick, not somewhere someone would wander by accident. Medical examiners later confirmed the remains were Ayanna Sawyer. The case shifted from missing person to homicide investigation officially. Press conferences changed tone. Detectives announced the identification carefully. No dramatic language, just confirmation. Community members gathered again. This time, the candles weren't for hope. They were for remembrance. And with confirmation of her death, public pressure intensified. And the timeline had tightened. Digital evidence had aligned. Surveillance footage had placed him moving during critical hours. Now there was a body. The question changed. It was no longer, where is she? It became, what happened inside that junkyard? And why did the only adult confirmed to be with her walk away alone? After Ayanna Sawyer's remains were identified in February 2019, investigators moved decisively. By that point, they had months of digital analysis, surveillance footage, cell tower mapping, witness interviews, forensic comparisons. The arrest of Jonathan Quiles was not dramatic. No chase, no public confrontation. He was taken into custody and transported for questioning. Interview room, neutral walls, metal table, recorder running. Detectives began calmly. They walked through the timeline again. December 19th. Lunch hour, the junkyard. Quiles repeated earlier claims. She didn't come by. Or maybe she did briefly, he wasn't sure. He said he was working. Said he had no reason to harm her. Said the phone data was coincidence. Coincidence is a word investigators hear often. They let him talk. They allowed silence to stretch. Then they placed documents on the table. Call logs, tower records, timestamps aligned side by side. They explained how cell sectors overlap, how coverage areas narrow. They showed him still frames from surveillance footage. Ayanna walking through the junkyard gate. His truck repositioning hours later. Then came the doorbell camera footage. Timestamp visible in the corner. his vehicle driving through a residential street later that night. When confronted with that footage, he adjusted his account, said he left briefly, said he returned, said he couldn't recall exact times. That adjustment created a gap, and that gap conflicted with earlier statements. Investigators pressed on. They asked about the 8:47 p.m. text message. He denied sending it, said he had no access to her phone. But forensic analysis showed limited device activity after 4:18 p.m. Minimal screen usage. No app switching, no scrolling patterns, consistent with a teenager actively messaging friends. They asked about his vehicle movements. He said he often moved cars around the yard. Routine behavior. But vehicle data logs didn't align with standard work patterns described by coworkers. Search warrants followed. His truck was processed again in detail. Electronic devices were seized, phones, computers, storage drives. Digital forensic specialists recovered deleted content, internet search history, location queries, communication records. Some material suggested increased attention toward Iana in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Frequent contact, private exchanges, but planning discussions. Prosecutors would later argue these patterns reflected control and fixation, monitoring behavior. He knew her school schedule, knew when she had lunch, knew when she would be alone. Inside the interview room, detectives gave him opportunities. They asked open-ended questions. They allowed pauses long enough for reconsideration. Still, no admission, just fragments, inconsistent memory, shifts in wording. He maintained he did not kill her, maintained he did not know how she died. But physical evidence placed her inside the junkyard that afternoon. Digital records placed both devices together for extended hours. Surveillance confirmed she entered. No footage confirmed her exit. The absence became as important as the presence. Eventually, he was formally charged with second-degree murder and related offenses. The arrest affidavit outlined the timeline in detail, each entry measured, each data point logged. Still no confession, while no full explanation of what occurred inside that property. Only the evidence, structured, layered, methodical, and a man whose answers kept narrowing as the facts expanded. Silence filled the remaining space. Because once the digital trail closes in, words alone cannot reopen it. When the case reached the courtroom in Duval County, it was no longer about suspicion. It was about structure. 12 jurors, 1 judge, rows of observers, a family divided by blood and marriage. The prosecution opened with a timeline, not emotion, not outrage, a sequence. They laid out the day, minute by minute. Iana leaving school, her phone connecting to the tower near the salvage yard, security footage of her walking through the gate, no footage of her leaving. They returned to one phrase repeatedly, access. Jonathan Quiles had access. He had privacy inside that yard. He had knowledge of her schedule. He had control over the environment once she stepped inside. Control, opportunity, digital footprint, fiber match, location lock. Those became the pillars of the state's case. Prosecutors displayed cell tower maps on large screens, colored sectors overlapping like wedges, 2 devices. Same area, same time, for extended hours. They showed vehicle data logs, ignition cycles, movement intervals. They played surveillance clips, short, unembellished. Then they introduced the forensic comparison of fibers recovered from Quiles's truck. Analysts testified about material consistency, microscopic examination, pattern alignment, not dramatic science, methodical work. Then came a pivotal witness, a forensic linguistics expert. The courtroom grew quiet. This testimony centered on the 8:47 p.m. message. I'm okay. Jurors saw enlarged screenshots of Iana's prior texts. Side by side with the final message, her earlier messages contained informal language, occasional emojis, personal tone. The 8:47 message lacked those traits. The expert explained authorship analysis, word choice patterns, punctuation habits, sentence rhythm. No single difference proves authorship, but patterns matter. The jury leaned forward. Silence settled during that comparison. It was a small detail. No, yet it carried weight. Because if that message was sent by someone else, it meant deliberate delay. The defense responded with a different framing. They argued the case was circumstantial. No eyewitness to the act. No direct recording of violence. No confession. They challenged the fiber analysis. Suggested secondary transfer. They questioned tower mapping accuracy. Pointed out that cell sectors can cover broader areas. They emphasized that for weeks, investigators had no body. At the time of arrest, remains had not yet been fully examined. They raised the possibility of family conflict, influencing interpretation, bias, pressure, emotion. They reminded jurors that suspicion does not equal proof. In a homicide prosecution without a direct confession, the standard is high, proof beyond reasonable doubt. The judge instructed the jury clearly. Circumstantial evidence can support conviction, but it must form a consistent and complete chain. Each link must connect logically. The burden does not shift, and it remains on the state. Throughout the trial, Jonathan Quiles sat quietly. Occasional note-taking, limited reaction. The prosecution closed by returning to structure. She walked into the yard. Her phone stopped moving there. His phone remained with hers. His vehicle moved during key hours. A message was sent that did not reflect her normal voice. She was later found deceased, and no other adult was placed with her during that window. The defense closed by urging caution. They asked jurors to separate assumption from certainty. They emphasized absence of eyewitnesses, of direct admission, of video capturing the act itself. The deliberation would determine whether the digital and forensic layers formed certainty or doubt. Because in court, emotion does not decide. Evidence does. And the jury now held the timeline in their hands. Verdict day arrived without spectacle. No cameras inside the courtroom. No raised voices in the hallway. Just families seated on opposite sides. Hands folded. Eyes fixed on the jury box. Jonathan Quiles sat still. The jurors entered in a single line. Faces neutral. Deliberations complete. The clerk stood. The first word mattered more than anything spoken during the entire trial. Guilty. Second-degree murder. Additional related charges. Each count read aloud. Each confirmed. No visible reaction from him. No outburst. Across the aisle, Ayanna Sawyer's mother lowered her head. Not collapse. Not celebration. Just a long breath finally released. Justice in a courtroom is structured. It doesn't repair what happened. It doesn't rewind a December afternoon. It simply determines responsibility. At sentencing, the judge reviewed the evidence again briefly. Digital overlap, surveillance footage, trace material, false statements. The court imposed life imprisonment. No early release, no short timeline, decades behind bars. Still, one question lingered. Even after conviction. Why? During trial, prosecutors argued control and fixation. An adult who maintained private communication with a teenager. An adult who knew when she would be alone. An adult who may have believed he could manage the narrative afterward. But motive does not always arrive in the clean sentences, and he never offered a full explanation. He never described what occurred inside that salvage yard. He never clarified how her life ended. The recovery site in Nassau County provided location, not clarity. The emotional gap remains. Outside the courthouse, statements were brief. Family members asked for privacy. They thanked investigators. They avoided extended commentary. There were no loud declarations, just exhaustion. The case also had broader effects. Digital forensic testimony played a central role. Cell tower mapping, message authorship analysis, device metadata review. Legal professionals across Florida took notice. Discussions emerged about standards for presenting cell site location data. Training protocols for investigators expanded. More emphasis placed on preserving digital evidence early in missing person cases. Local law enforcement agencies revisited procedures involving juveniles leaving campus during school hours. Community groups organized safety workshops. Conversations around boundaries between adults and minors intensified. In Jacksonville, a memorial space developed quietly. flowers placed near where she was last seen entering the junkyard area, photos taped to utility poles, annual remembrance gatherings, no grand monument, just consistency. Each year, family and friends return. They speak her name. They remember her as a teenager, not a case file. The legal chapter closed with a life sentence. But the emotional chapter continues for those who knew her. Because even when a verdict is read, some answers never arrive. Time moves forward, even when families wish it wouldn't. Inside the Sawyer home, certain things remain where they were. Her room is still arranged the way she left it. Clothes folded in drawers, shoes lined near the wall, photos tucked into the edge of a mirror. Her notebooks sit on a shelf, margins filled with doodles, half-finished plans, lists about the future, ordinary handwriting, normal teenage thoughts. LaShonda Sawyer has spoken publicly about routine, how mornings changed, how evenings feel different. She describes silence in a way that's difficult to explain, not loud, not dramatic, just the absence of everyday noise. No footsteps down the hallway, no music from behind a closed door, no quick "I'm back" when the front door opens. Routine became survival. Wake up, go to work, come home. Grief doesn't announce itself every hour. Sometimes it appears during simple moments: cooking dinner, folding laundry, passing the high school, on the way to the store. Family resilience looks quiet. No motivational speeches, no public anger, just endurance. They speak her name carefully. They share stories when they feel ready. And in time, they began channeling pain into something practical. A foundation was formed in Iyanna's name. Its focus centers on teen digital awareness, not fear-driven messages. Education. Workshops at local schools discuss communication boundaries between adults and minors. How grooming behavior often starts with secrecy. How language shifts slowly. How trust can be misused. Parents attend sessions about monitoring online interaction without isolating their children. Students are taught how to recognize red flags, not in dramatic terms, in clear, everyday language. Questions like, why would an adult ask you to keep conversations private? Why does someone older want to know your school schedule? Why does communication move off public platforms into hidden threads? These conversations don't rewrite the past, but they may protect someone else in the future. Law enforcement officials also continue reviewing missing person protocols, faster digital preservation, quicker tower data requests, more immediate school notification systems. Iyanna's case contributed to those adjustments. Her name now appears in training discussions, not as spectacle, as instruction. Meanwhile, anniversaries come and go. Each December carries weight. Family members gather privately, sometimes at the memorial space, sometimes at home, lavender flowers placed gently. Because at one point, that was her favorite color. There's no attempt to transform tragedy into inspiration. It remains what it is, a loss, an absence that cannot be filled by verdicts. Jonathan Quiles remains incarcerated, life imprisonment, no parole for decades. He has not provided further explanation. He has not offered public remorse. He has not clarified the exact sequence inside that salvage yard. The legal record outlines what the jury believed occurred. But emotional clarity is different. Some cases conclude with detailed confessions. Others conclude with discovery of motive written plainly. This one rests heavily on evidence, digital trails, forensic matches, timeline reconstruction. The courtroom answered one question: did he commit the crime? The jury said yes, beyond reasonable doubt. But another question lingers in a different space. Why did a trusted adult cross that line? Why did communication turn private? Why did control become more important than consequence? Those questions stretch beyond a single courtroom. They reach into families everywhere. They reach into everyday routines. They ask people to examine subtle warning signs. The story of Iyanna Sawyer does not end with sentencing. It continues in prevention efforts, in conversations between parents and children, in school policies about leaving campus, in digital literacy programs, and in the quiet endurance of a mother who still carries her daughter's memory every single day. Some cases end with a conviction. Others end with answers. And some never truly end at all. What did he do to his niece? The court answered legally. But emotionally, that question lingers. Thank you for spending your time with this story. If it stayed with you in any way, that means a lot. If you'd like to help this channel continue exploring cases like this, you can support by liking the video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, sharing it with others, or subscribing. Every bit of support helps more than you might realize. It allows these stories to be told carefully, respectfully, and thoroughly, so the details aren't lost and the people involved aren't forgotten. Hi, I'm grateful for everyone who chooses to watch, reflect, and be part of this community.